because in your bill is your direct consumption plus all the extra overheads of Eskom or the municipality. So your bill is actually inflated by a factor of more than 3 times what it would have been if everything had been run efficiently.
How has energy policy contributed to South Africa's ongoing electricity crisis? I posed this question to Ted Blom in a recent episode of my podcast, Solutions with David Ansara. What follows is a short extract from our longer conversation. If you would like to watch the full discussion with Ted Blom, that's linked in the description below. Enjoy. So Ted, much has been made about the announcement last year to lift the cap on private energy generation up to 100 megawatts. But we're not really seeing much movement there. Why is that taking so slow? And I mean, to me, when I look at that, I think that was a reform that was sort of imposed on the government. It was like a reactive reflex rather than something that the government was actively embracing.
Okay, you'll recall that prior to the 100 megawatt cap, the cap was 1 megawatt, and then there was talk about 10 megawatts. The fact of the matter is 99.9% of businesses don't employ an electrical engineer. We didn't need to. Eskom did it all for us. So by suddenly introducing a liberation or opening up of the licensing requirements, you caught everybody off guard. And I guess the first thing you need to do, I mean, if you're a reasonable manager, not a fool, is to go and get the expertise. Now, because 99% of the expertise on energy was located within Eskom and the municipalities, there's a dearth. And even of that expertise has been dumped by Eskom over the last 27 years because of BEE. Most of those people have either retired or they've emigrated. So yes, you've suddenly got a new domain that's opened up and no expertise. Then on top of that, you haven't got budgets. This stuff costs a lot of money. You're talking about capital expenditure of lots of big amounts of money. You know, the stuff comes in big chunks. These are lumpy investments. And together with the fact that there's a shortage of expertise, it will take a while. So it's not going to be instant porridge where you just add water and the solution is going to appear out of thin air. It will take quite a while for the industry to acquire the expertise, and then to make you've got to make a very judicious decision. Am I going to try and embark in a new direction and introduce lots of new risk into my business because it's an industry that I'm not familiar with, and I'm going to have to get up completely. I'm either going to do it properly or I'm going to close my business. And that's the decision. Other than the mining industry, which has to be where the minerals are, obviously, a lot of other industries have actually decided to pack up. I mean, it's not common knowledge, but we've lost more than 70 foundries in the last 14 years of load shedding. And we've lost more than 45 smelters of various sizes, including some of the biggest smelters that have been outsourced to Malaysia, where the energy is much, much cheaper and much more robust. So, and that's some senior members close to government and senior members of the ANC that have actually taken their own businesses offshore. But that's what happens with business. If the government policy isn't amenable to doing what you need to do, you close shop. That's it. You go and find something else to do. And that's what's happening in South Africa. That's why we've got 3 million plus people excess unemployed and new people not getting jobs. I mean, out of every matric year, I mean, less than 20% of the people are actually getting jobs.
All right. So, Ted, what about pricing of electricity? I mean, in terms of the tariffs, Eskom has to apply to NERSA, the regulator, for permission to hike rates. Would it not be better if we just had a floating price that might create in the short term a big spike in pricing, but it would eventually settle at a kind of more natural price equilibrium that would be more fair and would enable some of these private providers to compete more equitably?
No, absolutely. I'm a free marketeer. So, yes, I think all these price caps and things are actually artificial. And this whole argument of Eskom to want to be cost reflective is a joke. I mean, how can a monopoly be cost reflective? Because all its cost is the price. I mean, and the more inefficient it is, the higher the tariff. So, no, that's the old Brian Jarmus trick that he tried to pull on us. And it's been with Eskom in their narrative for the last 15 years. So I wouldn't fall for that joke. No, I'm all for open price. The fact is, NERSA has been hijacked as well for the last 14 years, in that they bought the nonsense of Eskom being starved of capital. Eskom was starved of capital because of the corruption, and they fell for the joke, and they increased the tariff so that Eskom could fund its capex out of its current income. I mean, that's, if you follow accounting, that's totally anathema to running a business. So yes, I would say that you can have an open market. You've got a problem with the grid, and the problem with the grid is actually that the grid, as we know it, is actually a legacy issue. And going forward, and I think we need to spend 10 seconds on looking forward. I did this at a paper in Cape Town about 3-4 years ago. Going forward, I see that the way that consumers will need energy will be very, very different to what we consume at the moment. We will not in future be dependent on a grid. Our needs will be micronized. So your demand for energy will be in millivolts as opposed to kilovolts or megavolts. As your equipment becomes more efficient and your storage improves, etc., etc. So I think 99% of the households, certainly the bricks and mortar households, will go off the grid, and they will find adequate solutions from renewables for their own domestic or for cluster houses consumption. And then you'll be stuck with indigents who can't afford electricity, and mega industries, the energy intensive user group, who are large consumers of energy and don't have enough property to actually put up their own generating facilities because they need large facilities. They will be stuck as users of the grid power, so to speak. But you've seen it with the COVID. The railway lines have disappeared. As we speak on a daily basis, when there's load shedding, the grid is disappearing. It's getting stolen and sent off to the smelters in the Far East. So I don't see the grid, unless if you're going to put a watchman every 100 meters, I don't see the grid being around for the next forever. Maybe for another 10 years at the longest, and then we'll be without a grid. The energy needs will have been micronized and packaged into much smaller units, and we will be able to have on-site generation wherever you are. And that will be, so the grid will fall in disarray, like the telecom grid. I mean, Telkom's not putting up any copper wires anymore. Everything's wireless. You actually can do electricity transmission wireless as well. It just hasn't been perfected properly. But those things will certainly get legs as we move forward over the next 10 years. So, yeah, I can see that if we look forward and we see that people are going to actually take ownership of their own power generation and needs, then I think we face a very different landscape. And the only people where there will be a market are the mega users, and how that will settle out, I guess it will work best if you have an open market where they contract with each other on an arm's length basis. And you should then see the price of electricity or energy come down drastically, because if you do the costing on where Eskom is and where Eskom should have been, had there not been corruption and incompetence, the cost of electricity should be roughly a quarter of what you and I pay, not what we are invoiced for consumption, but what we pay at the end of each month. Because in your bill is your direct consumption plus all the extra overheads of Eskom or the municipality. So your bill is actually inflated by a factor of more than 3 times what it would have been if everything had been run efficiently. So I see that in the long term, the real cost of energy will come down drastically over the next couple of years. And yes, it will only happen if people say, to hell with the government, I'm taking control of this and I'll do whatever the best solution is for my needs.
Yeah, and I think the problem at the moment is that Eskom is a single point of failure. And so what you want to do is spread that risk out. So if entrepreneurs do fail, that happens all the time in free markets, well, it doesn't collapse the whole system. Yeah, and to your point about the grid, it does seem, even to me as a non-technical person, maybe a bit inefficient to be transporting energy all the way down from Mpumalanga to the rest of the country, except for maybe Cape Town, which has the Kuberg facility, which is what I want to speak to you about next, Ted, before we close this conversation, which is the future of nuclear. Thanks for watching. Let us know what you think about this episode. Please comment down below. Also, if you would like to watch the full discussion with Ted Blom, that's linked over here. You can also subscribe to my other channel that's linked over here. My name is David Ansara. Until next time, take care.